When somebody is hospitalized, there is a common expectation that the person will be in a better condition when they leave the hospital than when they entered it. This is especially true when it comes to mental health hospitalizations. But this was not the case at all when it came to my hospitalization for bipolar disorder and a severe episode of mania that I suffered during my junior year at university. What's up, everybody? My name's Tyler Adolfo. I'm 26 years old. For those of you who are new to the channel, I have a diagnosis of bipolar type 1 with psychotic features. For those who are returning viewers, welcome back. I'm glad to have you here. In this video, I'm going to talk about how my experience being in a hospital only exacerbated my symptoms of mania. In other words, how my experience in a hospital only made me more crazy, how my symptoms, whether it be delusions or hallucinations, only intensified over the course of my stay in a hospital. And I want to start off by talking about what exactly got me hospitalized, what was going on at the time in my life, at that time period during which I got admitted. I was a junior in college. I was in a college social fraternity called Kappa Sigma, one of the party frats. I'm sure you guys seen many movies about it, I believe Animal House is one. It's not quite like that, but it has some resemblance. But in many ways, I was out of my element socially going into college that year. I was stepping outside of my comfort zone to a great degree. I've always been a fairly extroverted person, although I did exhibit a high degree of confidence at the same time. And this particular semester, I moved into a frat house. I went from dorming by myself to now suddenly living in an extremely noisy environment. And to this day, I wonder to the extent to which that triggered my mania. It's hard to pinpoint any sole individual thing and say this caused my mania, because there were so many things, right? There was, the fact that I'm extroverted and I'm out of my social element. There's the fact that I was drinking alcohol to cope with the manic symptoms I started to experience. And this is why I don't think alcohol is it, because I only started to binge drink alcohol upon experiencing severe symptoms of mania. It was my coping mechanism to deal with the fact that it felt like I was living in a horror movie. And that's the perfect lead into what got me hospitalized, because that's exactly what it felt like. It felt like I was living in a horror movie. At this moment in time, I believed that there were several brothers within my fraternity who were Nazis and conspiring with Nazis to come after others and come after me, and that they were part of this corrupt system on campus that was sexually assaulting women. And of course, none of this was true. This was all figments of my delusional imagination. But I believed it to be very true. In my mind, it was completely true. And it only got worse over time. It got to the point where I actually started contacting friends from high school to get their advice on how to deal with these facts, that there were Nazis in my fraternity and that they were sexually assaulting people and that there were these cover-ups on campus. And I started to develop grandiose feelings, these feelings of being on top of the world, and that I was like this superhero out to stop all this corruption, to stop the sexual assaults, to expose what was going on campus. I was the bearer of light, right? And so I contacted some friends from high school, and I remember speaking with them over the phone, and the manner in which I spoke was incredibly fast. And of course, what I said wasn't grounded in reality, so some of these friends grew very concerned. One of those friends in particular, Connor, was incredibly concerned at the things that I was saying, and so he contacted authorities to do a mental wellness check on me. And it's a good thing that he did, because I went to Campus Pond that night, and one of my intentions was to commit suicide in the event that people did not believe me about what was going on. So I had these delusions I believed that were real, And I had a plan of action to commit suicide in the event that people did not believe in the delusions that I had. Because I was sick and tired of being alone in having these delusions. I wanted these to be other people's delusions too. I knew in my mind that these things were real, that these things were really going on. And I wanted them addressed because I could not deal and cope with the pain of having to know that these things are going on and having to know these things on my own. So I remember going to Campus Pond, right? I was supposed to have this big press conference about sexual assault. There were supposed to be reporters and media there. And of course, none of that happened. But there were police there waiting for me. And an ambulance arrived shortly after. And the police were talking to me in a manner which they were trying to calm me down. They were trying to alleviate my stress. And that only worked to a very small degree, because while I was being put in the ambulance, I remember actually taking out my phone and thinking that I was talking to MI6 agents, telling them that, hey, I'm being, falsely hospitalized, being arrested for the things that I'm trying to expose. So it was an interesting interaction with the police at Campus Pond. Looking back on it in hindsight, they were super professional. They were very understanding of the things I was saying. They weren't judging what I was saying, and I think that's a good thing, because I think it could have turned me violent if they had judged. I probably would have suspected that they were in on the conspiracy. And so on the way to the hospital, I continued to speak about my delusions to the paramedics, and they were very astonished, I'll put it that way. I don't think they knew what to say. I don't think their training had properly prepared them for speaking to someone who was bipolar and manic to the extent that I was. And I got admitted to the hospital. I remember being in the downstairs area first. And in the downstairs area, they put me on a bed in this room with like these big elevator doors, and it was a darkly lit room. And they would give me access to my phone, which was surprising to me. So I would take my phone and I started posting sporadically all over social media. And this is one way that the psych ward made my mania worse, is at this moment in time, the last thing I needed was more connection to the outside world. The outside world was feeding into my delusions. I was having arguments with people over social media that I initiated because I'm delusional. And, I would read news stories and think that they're somehow connected, that they're part of a pattern of what's going on, that there's some greater conspiracy and that everything is connected. So that's a major thing that the hospital got wrong, was allowing me to have access to my phone. I know this is a policy that differs everywhere. There's hospitals that allow mental health patients access to their phone. There's hospitals that do not. I am of the belief, from my personal experience, that they should not have allowed me to have access to my phone. If I'm not safe enough to be around society, certainly it wouldn't be in my best interest as a patient to allow me to continue to interact with society, especially when I'm in this weakened position, this weakened state of mind, and I'm experiencing all these debilitating side effects. It was just not appropriate in my view. And so, did that end? No. Eventually, I got admitted to the upstairs. And upstairs, I actually started to exhibit severe hallucinations as well. I don't know how exactly this started, but there was a military general in the Air Force who does not exist, who I started having conversations with over the phone. And I was in such a position where I felt like I had no control over what was going on. I felt like I was being falsely imprisoned for trying to expose sexual assault, for trying to expose the Nazis on campus. There was a doctor downstairs who had a German-sounding last name, and I thought because of that he must be a Nazi. And it made me feel very on edge and guarded at all times while I was in this hospital. That's something that the hospital can't exactly control. They can't control what their names are. But it just goes to show how just yet another, aspect of being in the hospital actually made things worse for me, when hospitals are supposed to make things better. One thing they did get right upstairs is they put me on some kind of medication. It was a temporary acting one, so it wasn't like a long-term prescription, but something that they put me on that was supposed to alleviate and make me not feel so on edge, help alleviate stress so that I'm not feeling so guarded all the time. And whether it worked, it's highly debatable because I still experienced the hallucinations that I did. I was still having phone calls with the Air Force general on the phone about getting me out and how they were going to storm the hospital and, shut it down because they were holding me against my will unjustly. But that's the thing the upstairs got wrong, is they allowed me to have access to my phone again. Now, it wasn't at all times. In the upstairs, they actually had a special hour during which you could have access to your phone. However, for patients who were exhibiting good behavior, which apparently I was exhibiting because I was just being delusional to myself and hallucinations to myself, I was allowed to have access to my phone outside of that hour as well. In fact, they would even let us go to bed with our phones. And so I was still interacting with the outside world, continuing to strengthen and intensify the delusions that I experienced. And there's just so many things that could have been done better while I was in the hospital, right? I shouldn't have had access to my phone. I should have been put on a medication permanently. That's the major thing. And I feel like somebody should have been, in some fashion, more closely monitoring what I was experiencing. Because I understand there's only a limited amount of staff and there's a whole lot of patients. But from what I could observe, there were more than enough staff there to, monitor more closely people instead of just sitting in their office at their desks and not checking in on patients. Very rarely were we actually checked on. There were groups that we could voluntarily go to. And I went to a bunch of them, and I used them as an avenue to just express what was going on in my mind, which was crazy land. And so looking back on it, it's embarrassing, to say the least. I was just, in a sense, I felt like I had no control, though, over what I was going through in that hospital. And I had unchecked delusions, unchecked hallucinations. I had unlimited access to my phone. I was put on a medication, but only temporarily. So when I was released from the hospital, things escalated quickly. I was released on the grounds, and this is according to the hospital notes, that my symptoms had shown significant improvement. And yet, the day before I was released, I was having hallucination phone calls with a military general that does not exist. If they had been more closely monitoring myself, I don't think I would have ever been able to get away with that. But it just goes to show you that just because somebody gets released from the mental hospital, it doesn't mean they're in a better position than they were before, from when they entered it. That certainly wasn't the case for me. I left the hospital in an even more manic state. My delusions continued to get bolstered. My hallucinations got significantly worse. And my mind was a true circus. It was a mosh pit of crazy ideas. And I started to become more politically in tune with what was going on in the world of geopolitics, news, and I started to see a pattern in everything that was going on and started lashing out at everybody. And I've told this story in many of my other videos about how I then subsequently lost my full-time job. I lost my education, so I was no longer a full-time student because I got expelled. I even got arrested for 5 days because I got in a fight as a result of these symptoms I was experiencing. And thank God nobody was badly hurt during this fight, but it was significant because I've been a law-abiding citizen my whole life, and then all of a sudden, out of nowhere, I'm facing criminal charges. I'm expelled from my university. I lose a full-time job. Talk about a midlife crisis that I had happen in my 20s, essentially. And I think there's so many things that the hospital just could have done better. They did a very poor job, in my view, and a lot of my family concur with me on this particular issue. I should have never been released in the state that I was in. I was still experiencing delusions. I was still experiencing hallucinations. This notion that my symptoms were significantly improving just falls flat on its face when confronted with the evidence. And so that's my story about how the psych ward made my mania worse. Thank you all for watching. I hope you all have a wonderful day. I appreciate you all stopping by. My name is Tyler Adolfo. Peace out, y'all. Take care.